Hello everyone, welcome to the third video of your session on smoking and health. Last time we covered the health effects of smoking with a focus on the diseases it causes. This time, what about the effects of smoking on mortality and, importantly, the benefits of quitting smoking? Okay, so mortality, death. We've looked at all the various causes, but how do they come together and culminate into an overall impact on mortality on average for smokers? Now here, there's been some really terrific epidemiology, as I mentioned back in that first video. Epidemiology was kind of invented with smoking in the post-war era because you could do some just really great work. And the reason you could do such great work on smoking is because it's so unbelievably dangerous. You can pick up those size of effects relatively easily. So this is a very famous study by Richard Dole, which he started very soon after the Second World War, in which he and Austin Bradford Hill wrote to all the doctors on the medical register, right? All of them, and asked about their smoking habits. Now, most of these analyses focus only on men, as unfortunately there were just too few women doctors at that time to analyse. So they got responses from about 2/3 of all the doctors, about 35,000, and only about 17% were lifelong non-smokers. Their average age at the start was about 35, and they followed them up periodically between 1951 and 2001 and got responses or ascertained their mortality as they started to die for almost all of them up to 2001, right? 99%. Unbelievable study, fantastic. And in the final follow-up, only about 18% were still alive. And these were obviously mostly born later in the starting cohort, so in the 1920s. So a really major epidemiological study where you follow up your cohort for 50 years until most of them are dead. Now, Richard Dole, who survived most of them, he died in 2005 at 92. Austin Bradford Hill died in 1991, so didn't help write this final study. Also, Richard Peto joined the study in 1971, and you may have heard of him also, another very famous epidemiologist. Okay, so what you can see right here in this figure, these are survival curves. So they show what percentage of people have survived from the starting cohort up to a given age. So this is the cigarette smokers curve in blue here, and you can see that appreciable percentages of people are starting to die between 50 and 60. And by the time you get to 70, you've got 58% of your smoking cohort left. Or put another way, 42% of them have died by the age of 70. And as you can see, if you follow the curve down, pretty much all of them have died by 100. But the non-smokers, by the time you get to 70, 81% of this group is still alive, okay? So that's a massive difference. Remember, 58% for the smokers. And even 2% are still alive at 100, whereas remember, for the smokers, almost all of them have died by 100. Okay, so this curve gives you a way of calculating the number of life years lost by a smoker if they don't stop, right? And what you can see is that there's an average of 10 life years lost at 50%, so the average survival, with non-smokers being about 10 years older. Okay, so if you're an average smoker or you're an average doctor who smokes, and remember doctors, even in those days, doctors still had a comparatively good lifestyle. So the average smoker who didn't stop was losing about 10 years of life on average. So that's male doctors in Britain. And then we have the much more recent one on the right-hand side here, which is for women. And this Million Women's study, which was run by colleagues of Richard Dole, including Richard Peto, who I already mentioned, and he discussed the preliminary results of this study just a few days before Richard Dole died, and the report is dedicated to him. And this figure is presented in a somewhat different way because that's survival, right, on the left, and this is deaths on the right. So what you can see from this slide is you've got the smokers, which is the blue line here on the top. Here, by the age of 60, then 10% of smokers have died. Okay. Now, this study's been conducted later with life expectancy going up, as we all know, and it's also women, so life expectancy is higher. And we can also see by the age of 70, 24% of the smokers have died by this point, and then by the age of 80, 53% of the smokers. But for the non-smokers, we can see a very stark difference. So it's only 4% of non-smokers have died at the age of 60, and it's still even only 22% at the age of 80. And then if you look at this horizontal line here, it's the equivalent of this line here. So it says around 11 years for an equivalent percentage of deaths. So the point is really you've got 10 years for men and 11 years for women. It's very similar. It doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. If you smoke and carry on and you don't stop, then you're going to lose an average of around 10 or 11 years of life, which is pretty huge really what that amounts to. By the way, after the age of 35, which is when the risk really starts to kick in, you're effectively losing around 4 to 6 hours of life for every day you smoke. So a smoker is living, one who doesn't quit, in some sense. Instead of a 24-hour day, they're living an 18-hour day, right? Every day, 4 to 6 hours. That's quite a remarkable thing. So what that does mean is how urgent it is once you get into your 30s, if you smoke, to stop smoking. Now, here comes the good news of what happens if people do manage to stop smoking. This again is from Richard Dole's original doctor's study. So these figures are comparing people who stopped at different ages in the dotted line with continuing and never smokers in the same colours as on the previous figures. So in each case you've got the same horizontal separation between the red and the blue lines, which we've already discussed. So in the top left here you've got smokers in the dotted line who stopped smoking between the ages 25 to 34. And what you can see is if these smokers stop between 25 and 24, they have the same life expectancy as a non-smoker. You can see the lines are more or less indistinguishable. So what you might say is that you could get away with it in terms of mortality up until early 30s, but then it really becomes urgent to stop. However, I would say that I wouldn't ever advertise this message publicly, except in this MPH lecture or a similar arena with an audience in which almost none of us smokes, I imagine, because what you really don't want to do is encourage people to carry on smoking and then just try to stop at the age of 30, because the chances of success are actually quite small on any one attempt, probably about 5%. and on average people will probably end up being about 50 by the time they do succeed on average. Plus they would endure a number of other non-fatal unpleasant consequences from smoking, some of which we discussed in that previous video. So of course it's absolutely best not to start smoking at all in the first place, but if you do, then quit as soon as you can, in case you end up managing to quit much later than 30. In which case, for example, what about if you stop between the age of 35 and 44? Well, you can see they're already starting to lose a noticeable bit of life expectancy. This dotted line is now quite clearly separated in a negative fashion from the non-smokers in red. If you stop smoking between the ages of 45 and 54, then you've really lost quite a bit of life expectancy by this stage, which you're not getting back. And then if you stop between 55 and 64, then as you would expect, you've lost even more. But importantly, even at 55 to 64, you can still see this dotted line is much less than non-smokers, but it's still significantly above the line for people who have continued smoking their whole lives. So what this tells you is that at any age you can regain some life expectancy that you would otherwise have lost. So it's a really important message that it's always worth quitting. It doesn't matter how old you are, it's always worth quitting smoking. And finally, another very important point in all this is that some people, some smokers may say, that's fine, I don't want to be old. I don't mind if on average I end up dying at 64. I don't want to have the various disabilities people get as they get older. I think it's a bit crap being old. But there are two big problems with that. One, the problem with using smoking as a way to avoid old age is that it doesn't. Instead, it just brings on old age early. So you get all the problems of old age, all of the stuff that you would be going through in terms of your disability, pain, and so on. A lot of the bad stuff of being old, but you just get it 10 years earlier. You don't avoid it. And then the second problem is these are, of course, averages. But you can see the lines do start to diverge at much younger ages. It may be that for a given individual, you're someone who dies from a smoking related disease at 40 or 50. You're one of the small percentages that represent the division between the two solid lines at this age group. Okay. Remember, only 94% of smokers survive to 50 compared with 97% of non-smokers. Okay, so that's the long and short of it. Okay, that's the sort of basic epidemiology, the effects on mortality, and some of the benefits of quitting, which we've covered today, before we're going to move on to more of the psychology and mechanisms of addiction in our next video. Okay, thanks very much for your attention.